So William Penn is very drawn to all of these Quaker ideals, many of which are very progressive for the time period. Things like anti-slavery, gender equality, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right? So William Penn converts to the Quaker faith, which is a wildly unpopular decision at the time because the dominant religion in London and England, most of Europe, is Anglican Protestant, right? So William Penn, now a full-fledged Quaker, becomes a bit of a rabble-rouser, protesting the Church of England, trying to convert others to the Quaker faith. The king is not amused. He puts him in and out of jail a bunch of times because of this, so much so that William Penn will end up spending more time locked in the Tower of London than he will here in the colony of Pennsylvania in his lifetime. Right? Eventually the king says, I've had enough of this guy. I want to get you out of my hair once and for all. Now he can't just have him executed like he normally would, right? Because he is indebted to his family, right? So the king decides, I'll kill two birds with one stone. To pay off this debt, I will gift the Penn family this new piece of land in the New World in America that you can be in charge of. We'll call it Pennsylvania, which means Penn's Woods. So he also gets to send him away to be in charge of it as well. But William Penn says, wait a minute, I'm a Quaker. That means I reject things like pride and vanity. So I refuse to be in charge of anywhere that's named after myself. The king says, well, I got good news for you. I don't like you very much. I'm naming it after your dad and not you. So problem solved. William Penn Jr. arrives here in 1681. He founds Philadelphia in 1682. On his way over, he sent detailed maps and drawings for how he wants the city to be laid out, which makes Philadelphia the first planned city in all of North America. Right? In that plan is also his design for the road system, organized into a grid. So Philadelphia also has the first grid system design of any city in North America. Philadelphia very quickly becomes kind of one of the first true free religious societies in America, right? Because Quakers are very tolerant of other religions, stricter in a lot of other ways, right? No drinking, no gambling. But if you want to practice your religion, doesn't matter what it is, you're free to do so here in Pennsylvania. So that's why very quickly it becomes popular with a lot of other immigrants, because geographically it's similar to places like Germany, Scotland, Ireland, but no religious persecution. So by the time of the American Revolution, Philadelphia is going to be the largest, wealthiest, and most populous city in all of British North America. The only city in the entire British Empire that will rival Philadelphia by that time is London itself. Right? So lots happening here in Philly, right? By that time, there's between 30 to 35,000 people living in the city, mostly just condensed here in this neighborhood that we call Old City today. So it's a similar population density to somewhere like Mumbai in India today, to give you an idea. 1701, William Penn donates the land we are standing on to be used as a burial ground. But again, Quakers don't believe in pride or vanity. Everybody is equal, so he has all the headstones removed, and it becomes pretty much kind of a mass unmarked grave. So there's roughly estimated to be between 20 and 25,000 bodies buried throughout this entire property where we're standing on today. Okay? In 1804, they construct this building behind me, largely as you see it today, the Arch Street Meeting House. It's initially intended to be almost kind of like a mega church for the Quaker faith. That's why it's so big, right? And it is still used today, once a year, for the annual meeting where the 110 other delegations of the Quaker faith will meet here in Philadelphia to have their kind of State of the Union address of the Quaker religion as it was initially intended when it was first built. So for over 200 years, they've been doing that at this location. So very, very cool stuff, right? But William Penn is kind of one of the first people in history that goes on record as being a proponent of what he called colonial unionization, meaning all of these British colonies, we should be, governed by some kind of unifying body, right? So he lays the very early building blocks that our founding fathers will use about 100 years later when they're writing our Declaration of Independence. So Ben Franklin was very much a key to our community here in Philadelphia during his lifetime. There are not many things from that time period that he did not fund, sponsor, invent, give money to, help start, etc. So very integral to Philadelphia life during that time period. So now he sits and watches over Old City today. Okay. Number two, call that for his kite and key experiments and a nod to his work with electricity, right? And lastly, because it's made out of what?
Keys.
Keys, yes. Those are all real keys. There's over 1,000 different keys used to make this statue that the artist collected from all over the city, right? Very neat. It took over a year to collect all those. But there's two other elements that go into making this statue. One of them, if you look real closely, you can see the ridges, is pennies. Ben Franklin has a very famous saying. He says, a penny saved is a penny earned. Good job, yes. There's over 1.8 million pennies used to make that statue. That's why they're all extinct, because we use them all to make this. That's why we don't make them anymore. But Ben Franklin is laid to rest at Christ Church Burial Ground, about a block down that way. Ben Franklin gives our nation his first volunteer fire department. that depicts the history of the Philadelphia Fire Department. You can see Ben's silhouette in the center as well. Okay? You'll also see in the bottom right corner that logo that says Mural Arts. Right? Mural Arts is a program that still exists today that sponsors and funds a lot of our free public murals and artwork here in Philadelphia. Philadelphia ranks 3rd in the entire world in terms of the number of free public art that our city has. Right? So Betsy Ross credited with designing our nation's first Stars and Stripes flag, but no actual hard proof or evidence that she did in fact design our nation's first flag all by herself. What most likely happened is she worked with a team of other seamstresses, and they all kind of worked together to design what we see today. We have 100 years later, her grandson arrives at the White House for our country's 100th birthday, presenting letters from Grandma Betsy, telling all about how she was visited by her first husband's uncle, George Ross, and President Washington, General Washington back then, asking to design our nation's first flag, and they said that sounds good enough, and it just kind of sticks ever since. But a few things we know for sure about Betsy, right? She did live here in Philadelphia for most of her life, as far as we know, in this home right behind us. Okay. Some things about our flag itself that we can trace back to Betsy. Number one, our stars. We have how many stars on our original flag? 13. 13. Good job. If you notice, each of those stars has 5 points on it. Right? So George Washington is our general of our patriot troops during the Revolution. So that means he flies a flag with a 6-pointed star to denote his rank as a general. So he writes to Betsy and he says, "Betsy, I would love a 6-pointed star on our new nation's flag." And she says, "George, I would love if you've ever made a flag before, because you know how hard that is to do. What if we do 5 points instead?" Because remember, we're doing all of this by hand. So 5 points, a little easier to cut, a little easier to stitch, right? So he says, "Yes, ma'am, no problem." So we have 5-pointed stars instead. It's also their idea together to put the stars into a circle to symbolize we are now no longer 13 individual colonies. We are 13 United States of America, unbroken in a circle, right? That's why we have our original circle design. We're actually going to continue to add a star and a stripe for each state that enters the Union until about 1812. When we realize, okay, this might be a little bit too cumbersome to keep up with for our flag, so we revert back to the 13 stripes to honor our 13 original colonies, and we add a star for each state, right?
You're here for the game, obviously, huh?
I am. I'm ready for the game.
Are you ready for the game?
I'm not even from Brazil, but I'm ready for them.
I think you guys are in decent shape to
Yeah.
go all the way.
I hope so.
All right, my friends, welcome to Elfreth's Alley. Right, Elfreth's Alley, like we said, is the oldest continually lived on street in all of America. So just like Betsy Ross, we use all those words very carefully, so they're all true. Oldest continually lived on in America. Because there's always somebody who's like, "Wasn't there this street somewhere that's older?" And this is probably, but this is the oldest one in America that has been continuously occupied. It's on the sign since the time our allegiance was to the King of England. So from the time the first home was built on this street in 1713 up until today, there have continuously been people living in and occupying these homes. Right? There's 32 homes on this street. 29 of them are still privately owned and occupied today. Right? Now, no one's living by candlelight or anything. They're all modern homes, right? But the facades must remain as they did during colonial times, right? So that's why you won't see any window unit air conditioners or anything like that. You can't make any structural changes. Right, they're all registered historic landmarks, so lots and lots of cool stuff, right? Elfreth's Alley, named after Mr. Elfreth, who was the blacksmith in this neighborhood during the early 1700s, right? Like I said, some folks that live here today have been living here, since the 1960s. So very, very cool stuff, right? So the oldest ones are going to be like those two right there, where you see the wood kind of triangles above the door. So any homes with no glass above the door are the oldest ones. These from about 1720 to like 1760. A little more recent would be like this one right here, with more window panes above the door, like you saw at Betsy Ross's house. This is from about 1760s to like 1790s. So Ben Franklin formed the Philadelphia Contribution Ship in 1752. The first homeowners insurance policy in America. The company is still in existence today. So those plaques denote which company you paid your fire insurance to.
So this is, I like it that those are like the oldest houses, those two. I didn't know that. So it's like a 60 or 70 years older than the first building on there. And
no building codes back then. So each home to this day, dimensions are a little bit different. About 1,000, roughly about 1,000 square feet. Yeah.
So if this is where like blue collar workers lived, where was like the elite?
So we're gonna go see Ben Franklin's house in a little bit.
Yeah.
So he would probably be like the elitist of the elite, right? But more so like when we get closer to Independence Hall, Market Street, Market Street, stuff like that. Because you notice this is off Market Street, right?
Okay.
So that's why as the city's kind of growing and expanding, the two guys who are living, like one lives off Market, one lives off front. They're kind of like, oh, we'll take this little alley here for the more kind of blue collar people that need some more.
I guess that's where we're going.
The Church of the Revolution by historians because we have more signers of our Declaration of Independence that were members of this church than any other colonial church in America at that time period. Right? We have 15 different signers of our Declaration that were members of the church and are buried either here on these grounds or at Christ Church Burial Ground a few blocks away. Ben Franklin being chief among them. All right, they're all listed on that white plaque in the corner right there. Right. So Christ Church founded in 1695. Widely considered the first Episcopal church in North America. So when our steeple is finished in 1754, it's going to make Christ Church the tallest structure in the entire British Western Hemisphere. It's going to remain so for another 54 years. Right? Churches at the time were kind of like their skyscrapers. Right? The more taller, the more prominent, the more impressive it would have been. So this is going to be the tallest building George Washington lays his eyes on in his entire life. Right? Christ Church is also one of the only churches, if not the only church in America, that can claim to have uninterrupted in-person church service for 300 years, right? So again, church was founded in 1695, right? This iteration is built in 1727, but they were kind of had, using the old church while this one is being built. So as far as we know, during that time period, once a week, every week, for about 300 years, there's been an in-person church service here that's never missed, even up till today, right? Even during COVID, they had 3 people spread out and do a virtual service so they could still have people inside and kind of keep the street going. So uninterrupted in-person church service for 300 years.
Polynesian genes, so we pay some amount of money to have them inserted or something.
Welcome to Carpenter's Hall, right? Most underappreciated building in Philadelphia, in my opinion. Right? Carpenter's Hall, named after the Carpenters Company. The Carpenters Company is the oldest tradesmen's guild in America, America's first union, still active today, right? So all the woodworking we've seen done at all these buildings today, like this one, the post office, etc., all would have been done by the Carpenters Company, right? It's founded in 1724, right? Around 1770 or so, they decide, look, we need a place to conduct our business, have some meetings, and also just kind of show off our craftsmanship. So they're going to design and construct this hall behind us. So finished in 1774, and then very quickly becomes the largest private rental facility in all of Philadelphia. So they rent it out to different people, different groups, including our founding fathers when they arrived here in 1774 to host what we now know as the First Continental Congress from September to October of that year, presided over by Peyton Randolph of Virginia. It's at that meeting, which is very tense at times, right? Very hotly contested, that we are going to end up with what we now know as our Declaration of Rights and Grievances. So a list of everything the British Crown is doing wrong that we don't like, what we think our rights as your colonies should be, right? And what we're prepared to do if it's not met. But we are still very much trying to avoid a war. This is the greatest military superpower the world has ever seen by this point. We don't want to go to war if we don't have to. So we actually still sign that declaration, your loyal subjects, when we send it to the king, right? It does not work. Things get worse. The olive branch petition does not work, right? We have soldiers quartering in people's homes, in the streets. We have the shots at Lexington and Concord. Everything is going much, much worse than we could have ever thought. So finally, in 1776, our founding fathers decided we must meet again in Philadelphia and officially declare our independence and go to war with Great Britain to create our own nation. So we said, since Carpenter's Hall worked so great last time, let's use it again. So we come up, knock on the door, hey, can we use the hall? The guy answers, and he says, well, look, I have 2 weddings next Saturday, I have a bar mitzvah next Thursday. No, he doesn't say that, but the hall's unavailable, they can't use it, right? So instead we go 2 blocks down to what was called the State House at the time, which we now know as Independence Hall, where we will sign our declaration and become the United States. But if Independence Hall is where our nation is born, Carpenter's Hall is very much what it is conceived, right? Because it's at that meeting that Patrick Henry will stand up and say, gentlemen, today the distinction between a New Yorker, a New Englander, a Virginian, Pennsylvanian is no more. I'm no longer a Virginian, I'm an American, right? So the idea of the United States is born in Carpenter's Hall. It's why every signer of our Declaration of Independence has crossed over that top threshold. If you look at the steps going to that top one, it's much more run down than all the other ones because we preserved that initial piece of history, right? But much more going on in Carpenter's Hall than just that, right? This is where we will get our nation's first lending library upstairs on the 2nd floor, right? Our nation's first art gallery, sponsored by Benjamin Franklin, right? Ben Franklin and John Jay will meet in secret with spies from Paris in here during the war. It's kind of like our nation's first intelligence agency, right? Alexander Hamilton will open his first national bank out of this building, while the actual bank is under construction next door, right? So it's also the site of America's first bank robbery, right? It's at that meeting where we are deciding what our new nation and our new government will look like. We know that we cannot continue under tyrannical British rule, so we have to decide what our new nation is going to be. So again, very heated, very hotly contested. We don't know how it's going to go until eventually Ben Franklin, the senior member of the Congress, taps his cane on the floor and says, gentlemen, if we do not all hang together, we will most assuredly hang separately. What he means is that even just by being in that room, we are committing treason against the British crown. We are caught, we will be hanged, tortured, executed, all of the above, not fun. So if we're